Because it's okay if it's 0. I mean, in a sense, if it was
Too short.
okay.
It's live, but you wind up doing some editing.
Yeah, later on.
And we're live. Hey, Chris, can you see us all?
I can see everyone.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I am Maribel Rivera, live from CLOC in Las Vegas, the CLOC Global Institute. I am joined today. Well, I'll let Val take care of that, but I am here. We're here celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, Heritage Awareness Month, as part of the IDEA Committee. We've been a little quiet, but we just wanted to make sure that we started some things up again. And today's webinar is sponsored by Legal Operators. So thank them so much for giving us this gorgeous space to come live to you from. And I'm gonna go off camera and let all of these great individuals share with you a little bit more that you need to be aware of. Thank you.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So I'm Valerie Chan. I'm principal of Platform PR, and I'm joined by these two lovely folks.
And Chris online.
And Chris online. You want to introduce yourself, Joy?
Yes, my name is Joy Morrell. I'm with Practice Line Resources out of Los Angeles, and happy to be here.
I'm Anthony David. I'm with Deloitte, and I'm also out of Los Angeles.
I'm Chris Acosta. I'm at Morrison Forster, and I'm also out of Los Angeles.
I love that we're all out of Los Angeles.
So today is one of those days, and actually the month, where we sometimes we kind of hide ourselves in the background, but in terms of Asian awareness, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we don't do enough just in general to recognize our contributions to America. And we've actually done a lot as it relates to history, culture, and achievements in terms of getting ahead, advancing progress in the United States, as well as providing just a rich cultural awareness, not just Chinese food or Japanese food, just saying.
Filipino food.
Filipino food,
Yay.
of course. So next slide. So we're going to go into an interactive discussion like further on, but just in terms of the types of flavors and the flavors and regions that Asians are from, there are 50 plus different Asian American cultures that we don't really see. And I think part of it is 90, like some interesting stat, like 92% come from 19, the majority of 19 different nations come to the United States, with the other smaller amount coming to the US. But the reality is that Asian Americans comprise of more than 50 different countries. And we've adapted a lot of our cultures into what we see as American culture right now. And so I think oftentimes we're not, because we blend so well, we have a tendency to not see ourselves as agents of influence, agents of change, and when in fact we really are. So on that note,
Is the audio okay?
Yeah. Chris, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you guys.
Awesome, thank you.
great. So, from a stats perspective, we are more than 25 million strong. We're the fastest growing population in the US, making up around 7% of the US population. And we are projected to be the largest immigrant group in the US by 2055, which is
Wow.
pretty significant.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing is while we are on track to be the largest and fastest growing population, we are not very visible when it comes to traditional media, when it comes to seeing us in the workplace. And I know we'll be talking about that in discussion format, like later in the session, but it's something that from a staff perspective, we just need to be aware of. And so Maribel. I did talk about the largest Asian origin group coming for the 19 is, it's just one of those things where it is 97% of the US total Asian population. But, the biggest thing to take away from these stats is that we are actually one of the fastest growing and we're the most underseen, so to speak. And then going back to what this actually means from a workplace perspective. So the data shows that Asian Americans are actually doing well economically, primarily because we opt out, and that's like the last stat. But the reality is that in corporate America, which the majority of us are, it's one of those things where we're underrepresented. And I know we're going to be talking about it, what it means to how Asians are actually seen in the legal profession, what we've done. But I don't know, what are your thoughts on why we actually are not seen in the workplace? I mean, what do you think that is all about?
I don't know if it's representation, the lack of the representation, seeing role models that we can aspire to.
Mhm.
When we were talking last night, like a role model like Connie Chung back in the day.
Yeah.
Who was out there that just kind of represented who we may be.
Yeah, and then also I think culturally, I'm not an example of it,
Yeah.
but that there are so many who don't feel like they can speak or they have a voice, or they're just gonna put their head down and just work and do the work and just get it done and not really complain. Or, when there's maybe adversity culturally from my side, they would never talk about it because it was shameful to talk about the internment camps
Mhm.
or to talk about working in the fields. That wasn't something that they were proud of, and they just wanted to suppress it. And so I think they don't vocalize their pain as much.
Got it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Chris?
I think there's also that mantra of just doing the work and just getting it done and have our actions speak louder than words sometimes. But I think at the same time, we are starting to see the fact that we can be outspoken and that we should, use our voice and also, back it up with our actions. And I think that's now, especially you're seeing a lot of that, especially now with social media and at the level of accessibility for a lot of us.
Yeah, definitely. It is important to note that we have made tremendous progress, but right now we like to see that progress actually increase, just because the stats right now, and this is a recent report by McKinsey, shows that Asian Americans only account for 9% of senior vice presidents, and then 5% of promotions from the SVP to the C-suite in corporate America. So, and there still is a pay discrepancy, which is why we opt out. So we still have a tremendous amount to do in corporate America, but I think we're actually getting further along. So, and I think this is the biggest thing going to, I don't have to cover all the stats related to this because we've done a lot, but I wanted to put it on the slide because we have contributed a lot to the US that we're not actually talking about. We contribute to the Transcontinental Railroad. We actually took that and we completed it, right? We helped with laboring, with construction and farming and fishing, and Japanese and Koreans also helped in that. We changed some of the laws that are actually that were on the books as related to the influx of Chinese immigrants, and that was barred, right? And then from an actual Asians advancing, there has been a lot in terms of our representation in Congress, which and as well as our banding together with other Asians to create a voice. And I think the biggest thing, and I kind of curious on your take on this, while we've done so much as it relates to helping and doing and like trying to make ourselves known by the doing in representative areas, how is it that we are not coming together as a collective? Or maybe I'm not seeing it right. Do you see areas where people are coming together as a collective to actually help provide more contributions to the US. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's more and more we do see that. You know, I remember when I was much younger and I started my career, I didn't see that at all. I mean, my name, I remember actually starting 30 years ago, and my name's Anthony David, but in the Philippines it's David. And I remember going into this job and they hired me and I was like, Anthony David, and it was like, David, your name is David. And I went, yes, my name is David. And I just went along with that. You know?
Wow.
But now I'm much more comfortable saying Anthony David.
And again, they're coming together. I think that culturally, you'll see each one creating their own groups to come together, like the Filipino Women Network or the Filipinos Business Chamber of Commerce that I'm seeing there and that exist. But I'm also seeing the national, like the National Asian American Bar Association, right? You're seeing them come together, but I think it has to start at home first, right? Coming together in your own collective, getting that power and feeling like it is a united front, and then coming together. I think it's hard to bring disparate, because we're not the same. Our cultures are vastly different. And so in our, our values, our religions, all that comes into play. So you see it evolving though.
Got it. And what are your thoughts,
Chris?
Yeah, I would agree with Joy, especially is that given the number of cultures that we do make up, in some ways we've kind of grown up to be just more into our own culture, and we've looked at even other Asian cultures sometimes as an outsider. But I think now as you start to look at it, we are rolling everything up, and we can actually see that you do identify your own specific culture, Asian culture, but then you are looking at the collective, and you start to actually realize the power that that we do hold when we do come together. And I think that's actually, it's very I'm actually very optimistic as to how we're actually taking that momentum now and doing all these different things that are highly visible to the rest of the US.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of a side note then, I'm kind of curious if we could kind of go through our nationalities and talk about maybe one or two traditions that are uniquely Filipino or uniquely Chinese, or is there one? I guess the question.
Well, I'm Filipino Irish. So my father came to the States through the Merchant Marines and didn't become a naturalized citizen until 1947. But I grew up in a household where there was always rice in every dinner and mashed potatoes. There always had to be a mix. There always had to be that mix. So, but I love that. I love that I grew up in a household where I was very much like championed to be like, no, you are Filipino, and I had a very strong Irish mother, but she was the one that was actually much more like, you embraced your father's background.
Wow.
Yeah. And in 2011, I went back to the Philippines and my whole family just exploded. I met so many more Davids,
Yeah.
literally,
Davids,
literally, and created a family tree. So it holds very true to my heart now, growing up that way.
Got it.
Well, I'm Filipino Japanese, and I grew up with my Filipino side, and like that, the value system. So I haven't really, I didn't really get to know my Japanese side till I was like 18. So it's a little bit more of an adult. But as a child growing up in the Filipino household, everyone was auntie and uncle.
Yeah.
Right. I love the family aspect of the Filipino culture, and not just your immediate blood family, but the respect for elders, the community of, this is my cousin, it's my cousin, it's my cousin, and you're like, are you really cousins? Not really, but we're still family. So I really love that part of Filipino side.
And I think back when I was growing up, my father came to the States in 1923. That's when he immigrated through the Merchant Marines. And I was growing up, I was so curious about his background. But since he came in that first wave of immigrants, he was like, why do you want to know this? You're American. You're American. It's like, but Daddy, I want to know where you came from. Where is your family from? And all this background and getting that all. But I was raised by my father. He was like, you're American, you're American, you're American. It was my mother again who was like, you're Filipino.
Interesting.
Remember that.
That's interesting. And Chris?
Being born and raised in Los Angeles, we do have we're kind of lucky to have the ability to have the culture to be so prevalent. And, like Joy said, it's like everyone's related, but you're not necessarily related. And I think in some ways, growing up, you're like a little confused because you're like, okay, well, that's a blood cousin, but pretty much my cousin. So what I found interesting growing up was the fact that there was sometimes this conflict of trying to assimilate and trying to,
Mhm.
like a good example is I never learned Tagalog. I'm Filipino, so I never learned Tagalog, but I understood it.
Zion, Chris, Zion.
And I got to the point where I could do it, but that eventually kind of subsided. And and I think as I got older, and especially in college, I was lucky enough to have a number of different courses specifically on Filipino culture that I just, ate up, and it really gave me this understanding of like what that other side looks like in the Philippines, and kind of even some of the mentalities that we've kind of carried on, further and further. And I think that's always been the thing. And there is this balance of being an American and knowing that we are American, and at the same time still having that, respect and understanding of your roots and where you're coming from, and it kind of seeing how that all comes together. And I think that's where a lot of us are now, is that we can see we have a lot of this, substance and content that we can actually just reach and get now, where growing up we kind of didn't have that. Yeah, and I think that's big for us to really empower us. Oh,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I grew up Filipino Chinese. And actually it's kind of funny because on my mom's side, and I only recently learned that I'm only two children. I thought I was growing up Chinese, Filipino, Portuguese, Spanish, primarily because my mom immigrated from the Philippines. And I also learned how to assimilate well. But on my dad's side, we did a lot of Chinese food and celebration of culture. On my mom's side, we also did a lot of celebration of culture too. So it was almost like I wouldn't say a double whammy, but it was two different cultures kind of meshed together, where, to understand and be in the Filipino presence in the Filipino way is a little bit different in the Chinese side, where there was a huge expectation on success. There was a huge expectation that you're going to college, you are going to be, a doctor or
Lawyer.
yeah, exactly. Well,
Yes.
Mine was all
parents
doctors.
had a yeah, the doctor,
Yeah.
or like an entrepreneur, or somebody, something that was successful. My family, I don't know, on my mom's side, on the Filipino side, wasn't a fan of lawyers for some reason, but the Chinese side was like, oh yeah, you are going to get that graduate degree. And so it was, I felt like I was not caught between two cultures, but the celebration of the two cultures and trying to manage expectations of the two cultures was a little bit on the harder side for me, just because there was so much expectation growing up of who I should be, how I should think, collectively how I should think. It was hard to really understand I could think for myself, I could have a voice for myself, which is interesting.
I was going to say that it's not just another language. Like, oh, do you speak Spanish? Do you speak French? Whatever. Yes, we all have separate languages, but I think the Asian cultures have a very deep root in the education, in different, again, the religions and stuff. And not saying more than anyone else, but as a child, when you went Joy Luck Club, for example,
Right.
Oh my God, I was crying, right? Because everything just seemed to resonated with me.
Exactly,
right?
and it resonated with me as well.
Me too.
Exactly. Right.
Absolutely.
but I would say, the pressures growing up, especially, and dealing with the fact that, it's almost like you're predisposed to want to go into the medical field or anything else like that. It's almost like we look at that model minority trope again, and say, it's like, well, is that both internal and external? Are we actually putting that on ourselves, and adding that pressure to really get there? And I think it's, one of the things that I observed, especially going into college, was, I had a good majority of friends that were going in expecting to go to medical school. And it's like, as you go into college, you start to realize this isn't for me.
Mhm.
And I think there is always that conflict of how do I tell my parents that I'm
Mhm.
not gonna do this? And I think that's almost the part of your life where you're like, I have to create my own identity and what I do want to do and where I'm going to go from here. But how do I break this, the news to my parents?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I,
that graduation week was the most stressful week for me.
Yeah.
It was like, oh shoot, they're all coming. Oh shoot, all the questions are gonna happen.
Mm.
Oh shoot, nope, and
Yeah.
it's like almost being forced to face that reality.
When I go back to the Philippines, they owe my family there. So you're a doctor. Oh, I'm not a doctor. Because most of them are doctors or
Yeah.
nurses in my family. So to me, I'm like this oddity. That's why I go there and they go, well, you're mestizo. You're not really Filipino. Well, I'm actually Filipino.
Yeah,
Yeah, and a lot of my family are also nurses and
Mhm.
educators, serious business people. And I'm like, oh yeah. And not to say that I'm not serious, but like to go into law was very different. My Chinese side would be like, oh, that's great. But my Filipino side, oh gosh, lawyers, right? Just because. But and speaking of that, I have been fortunate to practice in addition to be a part of the legal industry for quite some time. And this is actually something that we should really kind of talk about because Asian Americans are the largest minority group at major law firms and has the lowest ratio of partners to associates.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, highest attrition rates. They are underrepresented amongst law clerks, professions, state court judges, and state and federal prosecutors.
Mm.
Yeah.
and not to say there's not like key ones, like in California, the Supreme Justice, it was Asian American. She just stepped down, right? Because it's now
Right.
else, but she's Filipino
Mm.
actually, right? So it's there, but like you said, the numbers aren't there. I think it's because our role models, right? We don't know we could aspire to those levels.
Right.
you know?
Exactly.
But I do think the attrition rate's a funny one because it is sometimes when you look at just the overall attrition rates in law firms,
Mhm.
a lot of lawyers never understood what it was like to be a lawyer in big law. So there is a big attrition rate because they quality of life or they want to do more nonprofit work, more philanthropic work, or work that they feel good about, or a specialty area, right? So the attrition rate in law firms are high in general, but I think that comes from because people just don't know what it's like. So I think for us, if we were being pressured to be a doctor or a lawyer, when they actually get there, they realize this is not what I want my life to be, and maybe they finally find their voice when they're getting old.
Well, I am kind of curious though, going back to some of the stats that we talked about earlier with McKinsey, at what part is there discrimination and bias associated with getting from, the associate level to the partner level? We don't have to answer this now, but it's definitely something to think
Yeah.
about. Yeah. Next slide.
Oh, did you want to talk about how part of it's like this is the
Yeah, you can
2020?
do it, yeah.
Oh, so this is NAPABA. They had a commitment to try and get 20 general counsels into, what is it, the Fortune 100 general counsel. And they specifically mentored and they provided real education and guidance
Mhm.
to get them there. So it was someone that got to the top rung and putting their arm down and pulling someone else up. I think that's where we have to be in what we do ourselves,
Absolutely. That said, we have contributed a lot to the legal profession. We've been more involved with community organizations, protests, other forms of advocacy since 2020. Societal events have played an issue and played a role, obviously. There's been more progress in the appointment of federal judges, which is great, and in the ranks of general counsel. Asian American federal judges have increased over the past 5 years, which is a significant increase compared to previous years.
Mhm.
But we're still underrepresented. So more obviously is to be done. I mean, if that's the biggest takeaway, we should be doing more. More needs to be done to make sure that we're recognized, in these roles, and we all have role models, especially if we're doing a lot of work on the associate level.
Mhm.
Yeah. This is the biggest thing from NAPABA. You know, there are 45 AAPI general counsels from Fortune 1000, up from 19 in 2009. So that's a pretty significant stat based off what you said, like
Yeah.
that active
Yeah.
role by, you know,
Yeah, they totally,
NAPABA.
right? They 20 by 2020, and look how far they've shot over that. That's amazing.
Absolutely. And only one of the 93 Senate confirmations in the US attorneys is Asian American. And there's 8 Asian Americans amongst the 2,400 elected prosecutors. So
Interesting.
I know,
Yeah.
just some really, really interesting stats. And I think this is the biggest thing. The last stat, going back to what have we done, Asian representation missing at the top, just 4.3% of equity partners at major firms were Asian American. I know.
So why do you think it's the case?
Well, being a partner, I think, takes a lot of networking, takes a lot of business development. And I don't know from an Asian perspective of the stereotype of us being shyer or less, I don't say aggressive, but business development may not come as naturally in the forms that other people take business development, like sales, right? Like if you look at the floor, if we were to survey how many salespeople are actually here and what their composition is, I don't even know how many of them are Asian American, because that's just not where we thrive, or that's not where we are very successful, right? Again, are we the ones that are maybe the non-equity partner because they get the work done? Maybe they're more operationally the partner versus the rainmaker, right? Maybe that's different.
Well, that's what I was trying to think in terms of that, like, so traditionally, if it's seen that, you're Asian American, you're going to be very compliant, you're going to be very gracious, you're going to be very patient. But at the same time, you're going to be a very hard worker.
Right.
Right. And I honestly think, going back to the model minority and how we're seen, and Chris, would love your thoughts, especially since you're at a law firm, right? Us actually saying, hey, we shouldn't be doing this, or I really demand a seat at the table, or here's how I see this issue. Let's think about it this way. That's not in our vernacular to actually, to do that.
Yeah.
So is that the reason why we're missing too?
I think so. I think it's part of it. I'm thinking about allyship, trying to who do you connect with?
Right.
Be part of, and do you feel comfortable doing that? Or do you feel more comfortable just putting your head down and doing the work?
Exactly. Chris?
I think that's also too why the DEI programs are very important, especially within the law firms, because it at least provides you the structure and the framework to kind of get you there. Because if you're not naturally going to do it, but then you're not exactly sure how you want to do it, if you do want to, it at least gives you that program to find yourself, find a way to elevate yourself to that degree. And I think because the DEI programs too, besides just the focus on diversity and inclusion, it's a lot of it is even just creating that mentorship. So one thing that Joy pointed out before was the person who got to the top and then reaching down to bring others up, and that's important from even a mentorship perspective. And it's not even just like, say, in big law, I would even say in e-discovery, you kind of see that just the same way too. It's important to kind of see that and just try to support and create that foundation for others to kind of, see the path of how we can actually get there. And, we do have those trailblazers that have, taken that first step, but then I think now it's just, all right, now we see that path. Let's at least now start to kind of leverage it as much as possible.
Right. But I am kind of curious, and then we could go, and I know we're kind of running up against another 10, 15 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Are we good?
Yeah.
We're good. Okay. I am kind of curious on DEI specifically. Do DEI programs go far enough to actually help with inclusion, especially when it comes to AAPI? Or do we not see ourselves as a minority group?
Well, I mean, for me, I just sometimes different corporations and how they address DEI is not always focused on AAPI. In the sense of, you know, like I said, we're the model minority, we're doing fine, we have our, look at our pay scales, we're where we're supposed to be. So that's maybe not what they're aiming for all the time. And so I think that it doesn't go far enough to look beyond the concept of equity, but again, the inclusion of really looking at diversity and
Mhm.
saying that the table is set for all these people. You know what I
But if
mean?
you think 10 years ago, we weren't having this conversation
No.
at all.
No, not at all.
When I was in the law firms, I was in law firms for over 20 years, never had the conversations. Here at Deloitte nowadays, like with this month,
Mhm.
everyone's talking.
Yeah.
I feel so much more comfortable with it.
I mean,
And it actually makes me proud. It makes me want to be more and more a part of that community.
I'm trying to think, I heard it like 20 years ago, but more of a complaint, like we can't retain diverse attorneys. What's wrong with us?
Interesting.
And it's 20 years ago. But again, in a law firm partner track, it's also people coming in off of the laterals and people coming in from maybe the staff attorney perspective. There was never a path all the time for them. And so what I think is interesting again is law firms are looking at retention. They are looking, how do we've made this investment in the first year, second year, third year. How do we keep them?
Keep them.
They want to, but who are the role models? Because at the time, 20 years ago, there weren't enough people at the top to say, here's people who look like me, or I can identify or relate to, you know?
Yeah, and it's still like 4.3% of equity partners and major firms in 2020. You know, has that really changed in the last 3 years? You know?
I think it's changed. I think it's changing.
Okay.
I think it's changing.
I think there's a difference too, as you talk about global law firms who have offices in these countries. When I look at diversity, I'm not saying, oh, let's count the lawyers from Japan and let's count the lawyers from Korea, and that's the diversity. I say, look at the US population of attorneys, because that's the question of that integration and assimilation into the US market. Because of course, in Japan, more than likely you're going to have Japanese partners, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just culturally, that's where they're located. So in a sense that's where they are. But so I think for me, when I look at diversity, it's looking at it in the lens of US, Asian American, Pacific Islander American, right? And how do we get up those rungs?
And how it's different
Yeah.
in different regions, in different
Yeah.
cities. 'Cause it's gonna be very
Exactly.
different in LA, very different in San Francisco, as
Exactly.
opposed to something like here in Vegas.
True,
or, you know,
exactly.
or New York.
Arizona or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Chris?
I think, no, I totally agree. I think even with DEI programs, before maybe it was more of a lip service or more superficial, but I think strategically it's become more integral into the business strategy of the law firms, especially the major law firms.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely important, and you can kind of see that. I think when you look at some of the firms, it's you really start to see more of a genuine approach to creating a fully bona fide program that first years and mid-year mid-level attorneys can aspire and say, you know what, I could see that this person that kind of looks like me is actually in a position of leadership, and it now creates like, okay, I can actually do that because she did it. That's definitely there, and I think we are definitely seeing that. I want to say within the past 3 years, just like Anthony said, it is happening. I think this really is happening, and I think that's the thing is, just because it's happening doesn't mean you let your foot off the pedal, like off the gas. So you want to continue with this approach and continue to push for it.
Yeah, but it's interesting when it's really when it's being embraced, DEI is being embraced, because in many cases, well, some cases it could be a buzzword.
Right.
Just like it's just a program we have, but there are firms and there are law firms that are actually take it very, very seriously.
Well, when you look at the corporate clients who have
Mhm.
made that
They
commitment.
expect it too.
Yeah, exactly. And their pressure is coming in that way. And, some people question the authenticity or the genuineness of law firms having these programs. And in the end, I'm like, what does it matter? It is a program that the clients are saying you need to meet this, otherwise you don't work with us.
And at times it's in an RFP.
Right.
Yes.
They'll ask, what are your initiatives here?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So however we get there, take the bull by the horns and ride it, right? And just do it. So people talk about, again, historically, how women have raised up through management, right? It wasn't easy 20 years ago, right? I joke with people, I had to learn how to smoke cigars, play golf, right? I mean, I got you, Chris. We're gonna go golf. No, but you know what I mean? But that was just something that I had to make sure. So I was in the room. I didn't care about a table.
Yeah.
I just want to be in the room so I could listen and then I could work hard to
And
prove
do you
what I
think it was to
got.
make them comfortable with you?
I didn't think I was consciously doing it. I just didn't want to be left out.
Exactly.
Like they'd come back on Monday and they knew things that I didn't know. And I'm like, well, when did we talk about this? Oh, well, we were on the course. Oh, you weren't there. They didn't mean to forget about me.
Mhm.
I just wasn't there. So I said, okay, I'm going to put myself there.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the thing I was thinking about now is that you can't be the victim. You have to say, I deserve this. This is what I need to get and go get it. Like Chris said, keep that foot on the pedal. And even if you are at a place that doesn't have a role model in that exact firm, look at the larger statistics and try and identify with someone outside of maybe your immediate law firm or company, but look at it as a whole.
Right. Exactly.
Interesting.
On that note, Maribel, can we go to the timeline? What? So just to let you know, we will put there's a lot of stats that we've included into this PowerPoint that talks about how Asians have made a difference, and we'll go back to that. Sorry, we're kind of reordering the slides, but in terms of timelines, going back to, really coming above and actually making ourselves known, we've actually had to overcome a lot of hurdles to be where we're at now, which is why it's exciting to actually celebrate AAPI Heritage Month. This is a timeline, it's a quick timeline, and there's lots more to it, but American history doesn't do a good job of actually showcasing what has been done on how we've either overcome some of the bias that inherently has come from, from the past and from the court system, but also, it shows that, despite what the hurdles set in front of us, we've been able to overcome, and then we'll go over to what famous people have done in the court system. But in 1854, the California Supreme Court declared Asian voices don't count, which was kind of interesting. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act, which not a lot of people talk about at all, but it actually slowed immigration and the immigration process. 1913 was the Alien Land Law, which barred Asian immigrants from owning land. Incidentally, there have been more discussions right now as it relates to Asians owning land in 2023.
Yeah, so it's still this day.
It's still to this day where people are having that conversation, primarily to Asian or Chinese immigrants specifically. But 1933, and Joy, you have a great story about that. Basically, it barred relationships between Caucasians and people of color from actually being in a relationship. So, and then in Seattle, World War II basically talks about the internment camps, which we've heard about. And then since the 1990s, we've experienced this wave of anti-Asian violence, which is kind of interesting. And of course, we all know about Kung Flu and the fear of COVID and the increase of Asian hate crimes since the pandemic, 339%, because of misinformation. So these things are still happening to this day, but we have a history of overcoming. Maribel, can you go back to the slides of people? Yeah. So, oh, you could, sorry. Oh. No, the other way, back. Yeah.
Where do you want to go?
So now forward to.
No, about forward
Forward
to.
This
There?
right
Yes.
there.
Yeah. So I mean, Chung Li versus Freeman. This is basically like Chung Lung's challenge the constitutionality of screening individuals entry into the United States. So challenge that law of making sure that Chinese denied entry to the United States and actually won. United States versus Wong Kim Ark, and this is regarding the Chinese Exclusion Act. Maribel. And then, Yang Yen Cheng was the first Chinese American licensed to practice law. And then, there's been a number of situations where we have lobbied and actually won for naturalization, for laws to actually be changed, which is fantastic. So, yeah, cool. And these are just some other factoids which are kind of fun in terms of recognition and progress that we've done in overcoming some of the issues that we've actually gone through. Herbert Choi, became the first Korean American in the United States admitted to the bar, which is fantastic. Yep. And then Hiram Fong served as judge advocate for the U.S. Air Force. Patty Minkst became the first Asian American woman to serve Congress before she won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Kamala Harris, as we all know, is the first South Asian American vice president. And then, we've actually made waves in enrolling in law school. So I think despite our challenges, we're actually overcoming quite a bit, and we've made a lot of progress, and there's more progress to be done. I think it's just at the top, like we were talking about, that needs to be done. I don't know.
Chris, you and I can still go to law school.
All right.
Yep, cool. And then there's more stats there, of course, but we could go on there. I think the biggest thing though is, and Chris alluded to it, Anthony alluded to it, part of the reason why we haven't really talked that much about AAPI month, Heritage Month, is because we like to become American, right? We want to be integrated, we want to be recognized as similar so that we want
others to feel comfortable with us.
Exactly. So I'm kind of curious your thoughts on what's on the screen about model minority traits. Is that true? Is it not true? What does it mean to you to be a model minority?
Well, most people look at me and they don't see that.
What do they see?
For me, I mean, there are times where like, well, you could be French, you could be, Hebrew, you could be anything. You can have many different nationalities. I have to identify myself. Right. That's how I feel. I have to do it. I have to be really proactive about that. So, and there have been times in the past where when I do push that forward, they go, "Oh, that's why you're smart." I was like, "Oh, really? That's why I'm smart?" So yeah, there's that kind of trait that people assign.
Yeah, I mean, there is stereotypes, and we're very fortunate that a lot of the stereotypes are in our favor, right? So if I know my audience, and I'll say is that like from acting, right? You have to kind of dress the part and understand where you're going. So I might go to an interview with my glasses on and my hair pulled back because this job requires me to be focused and smart. Not that I'm not, but you're kind of leaning into it. Exactly. Versus I obviously do not display the docile and submissive personality traits. So I think that sometimes, again, it's up to you to be you, and sometimes it might match, like being generous. I said, "Oh, Filipinos are all so generous." "Oh, do you cook adobo?" Yes, I do. But like again, there's just some things. But I don't know. Is it bad? Is it good? It is what it is.
Yeah. Sometimes others feel like they have to live up to it. I remember years ago, I was at a law firm in San Francisco, and there were these brilliant young, Asian attorneys and females, and they felt like they had to be. I have to be smart. I have to be driven. I have to show that. Even the way they dressed, just being a little buttoned up and jacket, that type of thing. Like I have to be taken seriously. That's part of it. Living up to like what people expect of you.
Yeah.
Which is one of those traits.
Absolutely.
Chris?
Sure. What I do find interesting is that we do have a history of contributing and being outspoken and fighting for our rights, which actually does actually contradict the model minority trope as it is.
Hmm.
So it's just one of those things that I kind of laughed when I thought about it. Is just that like, well, sure, there is that, but actually maybe the guy's just introverted or
Mm.
whatever.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that, or I don't want to say anything, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we are docile or just quiet. I think and I think that's the thing is if we look at our history, we do show that we have been outspoken, we have been advocates for our own rights, and as history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And time and time again, we have always spoke up for ourselves when it came down to it.
Yeah, I think what I was inspired about was the different Asian voices coming together when Texas was trying to pass that law that prevented the elimination of land use rights for Chinese immigrants, essentially, without guardrails on or notes on what that actually meant. And so
And what the purpose or intent of having something was.
exactly.
Right, and it's being too broad.
It was way too broad in taking away land use rights. And so, whenever economic prosperity is at risk, or if something's going to hurt us just as Asian Americans or as a race, that's when people start getting together
Mhm.
to actually create noise, to make sure that we have the voices that we need to. But it's only then, right, to talk about any inequities for an individual or to talk about any racism that actually might or might not happen, for ourselves. That's not something where I've seen people speak up
Right.
at all, or even acknowledge,
Right.
right? And so, I definitely am not docile or submissive. However, I do tend to not complain when it comes to things. I have a history of not speaking up whenever I notice things, or if I had, I've been punished before.
Mm.
So, I'll bring this up because, talking about the model minority trope, and I've become more so like the older I get, unfortunately, although I'm trying to speak up now, when I have spoken up because I saw some sort of injustice in the workplace. For example, one of my first jobs actually was at a PR firm. Ironically, a big PR firm for a very large, it was one of the top PR firms, and a neighbor had asked to find those who were culturally diverse to show up for the picture because they wanted the most diverse workplace, but the minorities didn't show up for the picture. Yeah, and so an email went out to all of the employees at the office asking
And this
for
is the
those.
neighbor
This is the neighbor
of the building.
Yeah, so but somebody from HR actually sent it out, right? Hey, come show up to the picture, right? Those who consider themselves culturally diverse, even though they were specifically looking for minorities, and there were only 3 minorities. Yeah, 3 minorities in the entire office. Yeah, so and it's sorry, it makes me realize, okay, by speaking up, I felt really uncomfortable speaking up. They were wondering why I even spoke up, and then I got dinged in my performance review, and I was never up for promotion after that. Yeah, and not to say that that still happens, because hopefully it doesn't happen anymore, and that was like 20 something years ago, right? But it makes you wonder, okay, given what people think of the model minority trope, given I'm supposed to be a certain way, A, am I different, right? Or am I trying to blend in, and B, do we have to worry about that at all? any sort of discrimination, based off of how people think we're supposed to be, or if we break that mold, would we actually be recognized and seen as leaders for breaking that mold? I don't know. I
Well, I mean,
pose it
that's
to
a-
all you guys.
Yeah, because that's a very specific situation and
Right.
And I don't know, but I do know that whenever people complain in general or whistleblow or
Mhm.
fight for some justice, it's all in how you frame it, who you talk to, the
Right.
culture, the culture of the firm or the company you're at. What are
Mhm.
the vehicles to get there? Because there's always like, I think that's why I love whistleblower lines. It's anonymous. So retaliation is less, and it's more about bring something to our attention that we
Right.
may not know. Right? But also help us out here understand that we didn't do it on purpose or go research it. So I think whistleblower lines have done a lot
Mhm.
to help people speak up.
And the
have-
premise behind that is if you keep it to yourself, it's your problem.
Mhm.
If you share it, it becomes our problem.
Right.
Much
I
more
like that.
vocal. So that's something that's huge. And when you were talking, I was thinking, you were vocal.
Yeah.
How did you see that land on others
Um,
in that room? Did they get quiet? Did they lean in?
they got quiet and wondered why I even brought that
That's
up.
what.
They're like, why did you even bring that up? This isn't a thing. Like, I don't see this as an issue. Why
Mhm.
this was not an issue. We didn't make a call out for, minorities. I'm like, you asked for people to show up who consider themselves culturally diverse, even though you were specifically looking for diversity, because all of the minorities didn't show up that day because they were affected,
And you showed up.
I
And you-
yeah, but it was just an interesting quandary because I think because like I was in Portland, Oregon at the time,
Mhm.
because it, having a diverse like diversity wasn't a thing back then in Portland. It's become much more so. Portland's a very diverse city now with flavors and cultures and all that stuff. Back then it wasn't. And so even bringing up the idea that I was different was a thing. They're like, what? Why is this a thing? It was a very interesting quandary.
I think we've come a long way.
Oh, we've come a long way since then.
I mean, if you
for
think
sure.
back of when All American Girl came out,
Yeah.
how groundbreaking that novel that was for people,
Mhm.
and unsettling too.
Right.
Oh, Chris.
So one thing I would mention too is that what has helped me, especially kind of look at where I was growing in my career, was actually having the people in certain positions. So, mentors. I remember the first time I met Joy, and I was like, "Oh, that's Joy Morale. She's over, at, such and such firm." Just approaching, one of my other mentors, like Greg Chan. So I was lucky enough to have that group again. It's like as a trailblazer to kind of pave the way and to be able to use them as soundboards for certain things, and that it would be okay to voice my concerns to a group that I actually felt comfortable with, and then where I could actually think about how to frame it in such a way that would make sense and resonate with others. And so that has been, very helpful. And I think that's kind of the thing is it really is the way that we sometimes frame it. And I think that's the thing. It's like, are you playing chess or are you playing checkers? And I always tell, folks I work with, regardless, is just you want to play chess. Don't go trying to just get that next one. Just like think about the long game and how you're going to approach it. And so, but I wouldn't have gotten there without being able to cut my, EQ teeth with, with folks that have already kind of gone there before me.
Yeah, definitely.
I actually felt the same thing. just disclaimer that I reported to Joy, as a law firm, and I found her as a mentor.
Yeah.
And she did not know I was Filipino too much later on. And she was very clear with it. I did not hire you because you're Filipino.
So Joy, I'm just kind of curious because in what I was doing, I didn't have that many Asian role models, and you were a trailblazer. Who was your role model for where you wanted to go?
Well, I'll be honest, this is why I think I love doing what we do and paying it forward, because mentors who I didn't think were mentors, my managers, bosses, or office administrators in the office I worked who saw I was working late all the time and what are you doing here? And I'd share my story, that people always promoted me or said my name somewhere. So I'm just very thankful. I think when you put things out in the world, it comes back. I don't think it had anything to do with my age, because I was very young to become a manager at a big firm. It wasn't because of my minority status. It was because I was hardworking. I cared about my clients. I cared about my coworkers. I was always trying to make things more efficient for the office to run. So I was caring about what my bosses cared about. I like Chris mentioned, framing it to what resonates with them. So receptionists at 6 o'clock were taking orders from like 30 different people because they were working late. And that poor receptionist is trying to manage all this food and everyone's angry. I streamlined that process back in 1998 or whatever it was, right? But now you have Uber Eats. So, but to care about others, which is a trait I feel that comes from my Filipino heritage. So I can't say it's divorced from culture, but it is who I am. So I think it wasn't about a role model, like I can say that. I was just being me. And other people at the time, it worked. They found that it helped them to help me, I guess. Like they wanted to help me because I helped them. Does that make sense? I don't know if that-
Absolutely. But also,
Yeah.
it's kind of like we mentioned earlier, it's like reaching down and helping others.
Mhm.
So it shares that wealth. It actually becomes worth it. They do this. And
Yes,
they do this.
exactly.
Ripple effect.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The one thing too is that Joy has always made herself readily accessible. And I
Yeah.
think it's been the big thing. It's not that, as busy as she is, as a lot of other folks are, they always prioritize making time. And I think that has been very helpful, especially if you're kind of sheepish at first, like you already put yourself out there to ask once, but she would follow through. And a lot of other folks, especially in that mentor position, have done that where they would follow through. And, I think that's been very helpful.
Great.
Don't be shy.
Exactly.
Question. How do we always have mentors, but how do we help to find those mentees from diverse backgrounds, from AAPI, that we can help uplift?
Oh, that's a good
That's
question.
a really good
That's
question.
a good question.
That's a really good question.
I mean, I know personally, I talk to a lot of friends and with what I do in teaching, and I know that our career has been a great, I don't say lucrative, like we're all wealthy, whatever, but I mean, it's given me a life. And so I know that I try and train people. So I try and pick people based on my friends who say, oh, my son or my nephew or my friend, my neighbor's daughter is looking for a job or whatever. But I think for me, it's a paying forward mentality of trying to find it. Again, not about diversity or anything, but just adversity. Try to find people like that. But how do you formally do that? I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's training, it's like training, the mentee to manage up. This is what you should do. Empower yourself to manage up and communicate with those ahead of you. Then you can do the same. And then they trickle down and they teach the others. They teach the others.
I definitely think that HR could play a role in that as well. And then also identifying people, not just because of color, but just, if somebody who's young and eager who wants to learn more. I think the key thing is, do they want to learn more, and how can we actually help them?
Well,
Foster.
it just brings me back to when I was in junior high. Bell Labs had a minority program for computer science. So again, a teacher put me up. I thought I was in trouble by the principal's office, but they said I was one of the 2 kids selected from our school district to go into this Bell Labs summer internship program. It was a multiple summer thing. So I think how can that happen is corporations should be doing earlier things. I was in 8th grade. I wasn't supposed to be computer science, right? Like, or anything like that. But I guess that's the answer too, is corporations are trying to really help diversity. Maybe they should be kind of creating these programs and we should try and highlight them.
Yeah, the one thing too is that the colleges are doing it, the universities. Like I actually try to stay readily involved within. I went to UC Irvine, and so as part of the alumni, I've done mentoring programs within the various schools that I was in. But then even in Cava, they actually have a program specifically to bring alumni and to share their story, and they actually pair us into a program. So I've had the opportunity to actually mentor a number of undergrads in Cava and share my story and how I got there and what they will go through and some of those other things. But I think those are some of the programs that are definitely out there. I think it's one of those things that as we get older, and I think to the point of what Joy says, I want to pay it forward because I had that, if it wasn't for them, I don't know where I'd be. And so I want to pay it forward to the next generation. And if that means that I will reach out to, my alumni and figure out what can I do to be engaged in what they're trying to achieve, then I'll go ahead and do so. But
Yeah.
they-
I like
Yeah,
that. Yeah, I'm playing a more proactive
and
role.
participate in the community,
Mhm.
Yeah,
going out and community outreach.
That we're not, I know we need to wrap up. We're not prone to actually saying, hey, I want to help out and do this because we're, like I going back to the model minority trope, I know I'm prone to just concentrate on work, but
Mhm.
that is a discussion for next time. On the 31st, May 31st, we're going to have a part 2 and how Asians can find their voice in corporate America and in law firms
Awesome.
and corporations. So, yeah,
well, thank
thank
you.
Nice,
you,
thank
thank
you.
you all.
Happy AAPI month. Bye, Chris.
Bye for now.
Take care.
And that's